The morning sun cast long shadows across the small coastal town of Millhaven as Dr. Sarah Chun stepped out of her modest sedan. The salty breeze carried the familiar scent of the ocean, a smell that had become her anchor in this quiet place she now called home. At 32, Sarah had traded the chaos of military field hospitals for the predictable rhythm of a civilian medical practice. But the transition hadn't been as smooth as she'd hoped. Her hands, steady as ever when treating patients, trembled slightly as she fumbled with her keys outside the clinic. 3 years had passed since she'd left the Navy, since she'd hung up her uniform and the weight of memories that came with it. The nightmares had faded, mostly, but mornings like this still brought back flashes of desert heat and the metallic taste of fear. "Dr. Chun," called Maria Santos, her receptionist, from across the parking lot. "We've got a full schedule today, including that new patient who called yesterday." Sarah nodded, forcing a smile as she pushed through the glass doors of the Millhaven Community Health Center. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with fresh coffee greeted her, a combination that had become oddly comforting. This was her world now: scheduled appointments, routine checkups, and the occasional emergency that didn't involve explosions or gunfire. The morning passed in its usual pattern. Mrs. Henderson came in for her blood pressure medication refill, chattering about her grandchildren as Sarah checked her vitals. Tommy Morrison, barely 16, nervously asked about his acne treatment while his mother waited in the hallway. These were the moments Sarah cherished. Simple problems with simple solutions, far removed from the life and death decisions that had once defined her days. It was just after lunch when Maria knocked on her office door, her expression unusually serious. "Dr. Chun, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems like she really needs help." Sarah looked up from the patient file she'd been reviewing. "Send her in." The woman who entered her office moved with a careful precision that Sarah recognized immediately, though she couldn't place where she'd seen it before. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were simple, jeans and a plain blue sweater, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made Sarah pay attention. "Dr. Chun, I'm Emma Rodriguez. I was hoping you might have time to see me today." Emma's voice was steady, controlled, but Sarah caught the slight tremor underneath. As a medic, she'd learned to read people quickly, and everything about Emma Rodriguez suggested someone holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Of course. Please have a seat." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What brings you in today?" Emma sat down, her posture straight and alert. "I've been having some issues. Headaches, mostly, and trouble sleeping." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I thought it might be stress from the move. I just relocated here from San Diego." Sarah made notes as Emma spoke, but found herself studying her new patient's face. There were faint lines around her eyes, the kind that came from squinting against bright sun and harsh conditions. A small scar ran along her left temple, barely visible but perfectly straight, the kind left by shrapnel or debris. "Tell me about these headaches," Sarah said. "When did they start?" "About 6 months ago. They're worse at night, and sometimes loud noises seem to trigger them." Emma's fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern against her thigh, a nervous habit that Sarah noticed immediately. It was Morse code, SOS, repeated over and over. The realization hit Sarah like a cold wave. She'd seen that exact gesture before, had made it herself during the worst nights in Afghanistan when sleep wouldn't come and the walls felt like they were closing in. Her pen paused over the notepad as she looked at Emma with new understanding. "Emma," she said gently, "can you tell me what kind of work you did in San Diego?" For just a moment, Emma's carefully controlled expression faltered. "I was in security, private security." It was a standard cover story, one that Sarah had heard countless times from other veterans who weren't ready to talk about their service. She decided not to push, at least not yet. "I'd like to run some basic tests," Sarah said, standing and moving to her examination equipment. "Check your blood pressure, look at your reflexes, that sort of thing. Is that okay with you?" Emma nodded, but As Sarah approached with the blood pressure cuff, she noticed her patient's breathing quickened slightly. When Sarah reached out to position the cuff on Emma's arm, Emma flinched away from the touch, a reaction so quick it was almost imperceptible. "I'm sorry," Emma said immediately. "I'm not good with being touched. Medical procedures make me nervous." Sarah stepped back, giving Emma space. "That's completely understandable. We could take this as slowly as you need. Would it help if I explained everything before I did it?" Relief flickered across Emma's face. "Yes, that would help." As Sarah conducted the examination, explaining each step before performing it, she noticed other details. Emma's hands bore small scars, the kind that came from working with rough equipment under difficult conditions. Her muscle tone suggested someone who maintained military-level fitness despite no longer being required to. Most telling of all was the way Emma's eyes constantly tracked the room's exits, a hypervigilance that Sarah recognized from her own early days of civilian life. "Everything looks normal from a physical standpoint," Sarah said as she completed the examination. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated, which could be contributing to the headaches, the sleep issues, and noise sensitivity." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes those symptoms can be related to stress or trauma." Emma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I don't have PTSD, if that's what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything," Sarah said calmly. "I'm just trying to understand what might be causing your symptoms so we can find the best way to help you." For a long moment, the two women looked at each other across the small examination room. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out behind Emma's dark eyes, the desire to trust warring with years of training that said vulnerability was weakness. "I'd like to prescribe something for the headaches," Sarah finally said, moving back to her desk. "And I have some suggestions for sleep hygiene that might help with the insomnia. But, Emma, if you ever want to talk about what's really going on, I want you to know that this is a safe space." Emma stood up, her movement fluid and controlled. "Thank you, Dr. Chun. I appreciate that." As Sarah wrote out the prescription, she made a decision that went against her usual professional boundaries. "Emma, can I share something with you?" Emma paused in the process of gathering her purse. "What?" "I was a Navy medic. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I've been where you are. The headaches, the insomnia, the feeling like you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop." Sarah tore off the prescription and held it out. "If you ever want to talk to someone who understands, my door is open." The prescription fluttered slightly in Sarah's outstretched hand as Emma stared at her. For a moment, her careful mask slipped completely, revealing a depth of pain that made Sarah's chest tight. "Thank you," Emma whispered, taking the paper. "That means more than you know." After Emma left, Sarah sat in her office, staring at the door long after it had closed. She'd broken protocol by revealing her own history to a patient, something she'd never done before. But there had been something about Emma Rodriguez that had cut straight through her professional defenses. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of routine appointments, but Sarah's mind kept returning to Emma. The way she'd carried herself, the careful control of her emotions, the practiced deflection when asked about her past, it all pointed to someone with military experience, probably combat experience. As the day ended and Sarah prepared to leave the clinic, Maria appeared in her doorway with a thoughtful expression. "That woman who came in today, Emma Rodriguez, there was something familiar about her," Maria said. "I've been trying to place it all afternoon." "Familiar how?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "My brother Miguel served in the army, did 3 tours in Iraq. When he came home, he moved the same way she does, like he was always ready for trouble, you know? Very aware of everything around him." Sarah nodded slowly. "Did you notice anything else about her?" "She paid in cash," Maria said. "Most people use insurance cards, but she specifically asked to pay out of pocket. Said she didn't want to deal with insurance hassles, but..." She shrugged. It just seemed odd. That night, Sarah sat on the deck of her small beach house, watching the waves roll in under the moonlight. The sound of the ocean usually calmed her, but tonight her mind was too active for peace. She kept thinking about Emma Rodriguez and the careful way she'd answered every question revealing nothing while appearing to be cooperative. Sarah's own journey back from war had been difficult enough with support systems in place. She'd had access to military health care, veteran services, and a family who, while they didn't understand what she'd been through, at least tried to be supportive. But if Emma was avoiding official channels, paying cash for medical care, and using cover stories about her past, it suggested someone who was trying to disappear from their former life entirely. The question was why? Was Emma running from something or towards something? And more importantly, was she safe? As Sarah sat there in the darkness, she made another decision that went against her usual cautious nature. Tomorrow, she would do some research, not to violate Emma's privacy, but to better understand how she could help. Because despite only meeting her once, Sarah felt a connection to Emma Rodriguez that she couldn't explain, a recognition of shared experience that went deeper than medical training or professional concern. The ocean breeze carried the sound of distant thunder, and Sarah looked up to see storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Change was coming to Millhaven, whether she was ready for it or not. And somehow, she knew that Emma Rodriguez was going to be at the center of it. Inside her house, Sarah's laptop sat on the kitchen table, waiting. Tomorrow, she would start looking for answers. Tonight, she would simply sit with the questions and hope that Emma Rodriguez would find the courage to trust her with the truth. The storm clouds moved closer, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the quiet coastal town. In a small apartment across town, Emma Rodriguez stood at her own window, watching the same approaching storm and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake by seeking medical help. The prescription in her pocket felt like both a lifeline and a potential trap, but for the first time in months, she felt like someone might actually understand what she was going through. Neither woman slept well that night, both haunted by the recognition they'd seen in each other's eyes and the unspoken understanding that their lives had somehow become connected in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the streets of Millhaven washed clean and glistening under the early sun. Sarah arrived at the clinic earlier than usual, her laptop bag heavier than normal with the weight of curiosity and concern. She'd spent most of the night thinking about Emma Rodriguez, and the professional part of her brain insisted she was overstepping boundaries. But the veteran part of her, the part that remembered what it felt like to be lost and struggling, couldn't let it go. Maria wasn't due in for another hour, so Sarah had the clinic to herself. She settled into her office chair and opened her laptop, staring at the search screen for a long moment before typing Emma Rodriguez, San Diego Security. The results were frustratingly generic. Dozens of women with the same name, security companies, and LinkedIn profiles that could belong to anyone. She tried variations, adding military terms, but nothing specific emerged. It was as if Emma Rodriguez had carefully constructed a digital footprint that revealed nothing meaningful about her past. The morning appointments began with their usual rhythm, but Sarah found herself distracted, checking the clock and wondering if Emma would return. She'd given her enough medication for 2 weeks, which meant she shouldn't need a follow-up for at least 10 days, unless something else brought her back. It was during her lunch break that Sarah decided to take a different approach. Instead of searching for Emma directly, she pulled up resources for veterans in the area. If Emma was struggling with service-connected issues, she might benefit from support groups or veteran services, even if she wasn't ready to admit her military background. The Veterans Affairs website led her to a local support group that met twice weekly at the community center. Sarah made a note of the meeting times, thinking she might mention it to Emma during her next visit. Then, she found something that made her pause. A news article from 18 months ago about a military contractor incident in Afghanistan. The article was brief, mentioning an IED attack on a convoy that had resulted in several casualties. What caught Sarah's attention was the mention of a female security contractor who had helped treat wounded personnel at the scene before being evacuated herself. The contractor wasn't named, but the timing matched Emma's 6-month timeline for when her symptoms had started. Sarah's hands stilled on the keyboard. Military contractors often fell through the cracks of veteran support systems. They serve alongside military personnel, face the same dangers, but didn't always have access to the same resources afterward. If Emma had been wounded in that incident, both physically and psychologically, she might be struggling to find appropriate care. A knock on her office door interrupted her research. Dr. Chun, Maria's voice carried an unusual note of concern. There's a situation in exam room 2. The patient specifically asked for you. Sarah closed her laptop and followed Maria down the hall, but stopped short when she saw Emma Rodriguez sitting on the examination table. It had only been 2 days since her last visit, and Emma looked worse, pale, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Emma," Sarah said, keeping her voice gentle as she entered the room. "What's going on?" "The medication isn't working," Emma said without preamble. "The headaches are getting worse, and I haven't slept more than an hour at a time since Monday night." Sarah moved slowly toward the chair beside the examination table, noting how Emma's eyes tracked her movement. "Can you tell me what's been different? Any new stressors or triggers?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "You mean besides admitting to a doctor that I need help? That was harder than I thought it would be. Sometimes taking that first step can make everything feel more intense before it gets better," Sarah said. "It's like when you finally admit you're injured. Suddenly, the pain feels worse because you're not spending all your energy ignoring it." Emma looked at her sharply. "That sounds like personal experience talking." Sarah nodded. "It is. When I left the Navy, I thought I could just put it all behind me and move on. Took me about 6 months to realize that wasn't working." "What did you do?" "I got help. Real help, not just medication to manage symptoms." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know you can tell me the truth. Were you military or contracted military?" For a long moment, Emma said nothing. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across her features, the desperate need for help warring with years of training that said trust was dangerous. "Contracted," Emma finally whispered. 2 years in Afghanistan. Private military company providing security for supply convoys." The admission seemed to drain something from Emma, and her shoulders sagged as if she'd been carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Sarah felt a mix of relief and concern, relief that Emma was finally opening up, concern for what that openness might reveal. "Thank you for trusting me with that," Sarah said. "Can you tell me what happened 6 months ago?" Emma's hands started the same Morse code pattern Sarah had noticed before. SOS tapped out against her thigh. IED. "We were escorting medical supplies to a forward operating base when the lead vehicle hit a roadside bomb. 3 Kia, 5 wounded. Were you injured?" "Concussion, some shrapnel on my shoulder and leg. Nothing major, according to the field medic." Emma's voice was flat, emotionless. "I was conscious, so I helped treat the others until the medevac arrived. Standard protocol." Sarah nodded, recognizing the tone. She'd heard it before from soldiers and contractors who had disassociated from traumatic experiences as a survival mechanism. "What happened after the evacuation?" Company policy was to rotate anyone involved in a significant incident back to the States for medical clearance and debriefing. "I was cleared for duty after 2 weeks, but..." Emma paused, her tapping becoming more agitated. "I couldn't get back on the convoy trucks. Every time I tried, I'd have panic attacks. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The company said it was normal, that it would pass. But it didn't. It got worse. I started having nightmares, couldn't be around crowds, jumped at every loud noise. The company doctor said it was acute stress reaction and gave me some pills, but they made everything fuzzy. I couldn't do my job effectively, so they terminated my contract." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest. Anger at a system that would abandon someone who had sacrificed so much. "What did you do then?" "Came home to San Diego. Tried to get help through the VA, but contractors don't qualify for full veteran benefits. I applied for some programs, but the wait lists were months long." Emma's voice grew quieter. "I couldn't wait months. I was barely functioning day to day. So you moved here?" Emma nodded. "Fresh start, I thought. Small town, quiet. Maybe I could figure things out on my own." but it's not working. If anything, the isolation is making it worse. Sarah absorbed this information, her medical training cataloging symptoms, while her personal experience filled in the emotional context. Emma was describing classic PTSD symptoms complicated by survivor's guilt and a lack of proper support systems. Emma, what you're experiencing has a name. It's called post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's not your fault, and it's definitely treatable. I know what PTSD is, Emma said sharply. I've done the research, but knowing what it's called doesn't make it go away. No, it doesn't. But proper treatment can make it manageable. Sarah stood up and moved to her desk, pulling out a business card. There's a therapist in the next town over who specializes in trauma therapy for veterans and contractors. Her name is Dr. Lisa Manning, and she does excellent work. Emma took the card but didn't look at it. I can't afford therapy. I'm paying for everything out of pocket, and my savings aren't going to last much longer. Dr. Manning works on a sliding scale, and there's some grant programs for contractors. I can help you apply. Sarah sat back down, choosing her next words carefully. But, Emma, there's something else we need to talk about. The way you're living right now, isolating yourself, avoiding official channels, paying cash for everything. It's not sustainable. And, more importantly, it's keeping you from getting the help you need. Emma's expression hardened. I can't go through official channels. If my former company finds out I'm seeking treatment for PTSD, they could use it against me. I signed a lot of non-disclosure agreements, and they made it very clear that talking about what happened could have legal consequences. This was a wrinkle Sarah hadn't expected. What kind of legal consequences? Breach of contract, violation of security clearances, defamation of the company's reputation. They essentially own my story, and they don't want it told. Emma's hands clenched into fists. So I'm stuck. I can't get proper help without admitting what happened, but admitting what happened could destroy any chance I have of rebuilding my life. Sarah felt the full weight of Emma's situation settling over her. It was more complicated than simple PTSD treatment. Emma was trapped between her need for help and legitimate fears about the consequences of seeking it. Emma, I want to help you figure this out, but I need you to know that this goes beyond my scope of practice as a family physician. You need specialized care, and you need legal advice about your rights as a contractor. I know. Emma's voice was barely audible. I just didn't know where else to turn. When you said you were a veteran, it was the first time in months that I felt like someone might actually understand. The vulnerability in Emma's admission broke something open in Sarah's chest. She thought about her own journey home from war, how crucial it had been to have people who understood what she'd been through. Emma had been doing this alone for months, carrying trauma and fear with no support system. Okay, Sarah said, making a decision that she knew went against professional protocols. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to connect you with Dr. Manning, and I want to personally ensure that your financial concerns are addressed. There are ways to get help without going through official military or contractor channels. Emma looked up at her with something that might have been hope. Why would you do that? You barely know me. Because I've been where you are, and I know how easy it is to disappear into isolation and fear when you don't see any good options. Sarah leaned forward, making sure Emma was looking directly at her. And because I believe that people who put themselves in harm's way to protect others deserve better than being abandoned when they come home broken. For the first time since entering the room, Emma's carefully controlled expression cracked completely. Tears she'd been holding back for months spilled over, and her whole body seemed to shake with the force of finally letting go. Sarah grabbed a box of tissues and moved her chair closer. It's okay, she said quietly. It's going to be okay. We're going to figure this out together. Emma cried for several minutes, months of suppressed grief and fear pouring out in the safety of Sarah's office. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw but steadier. I haven't told anyone the truth about what happened. Not anyone. I've been so scared that if I said it out loud, it would make it real. It's already real, Sarah said gently. But now you don't have to carry it alone. As Emma began to compose herself, Sarah realized that this moment marked a turning point. not just for Emma, but for herself as well. She'd spent 3 years trying to leave her military past behind, focusing on building a quiet civilian life. But sitting here with Emma, she understood that her experiences as a combat medic weren't something to be forgotten or hidden away. They were part of what equipped her to help people like Emma who fell through the cracks of traditional support systems. Dr. Chun, Emma said as she wiped her eyes with a tissue, "What you said about getting help without going through official channels, did you mean that?" "I meant every word. It might take some creativity and calling in some favors, but yes, we can make it happen." Sarah pulled out her prescription pad and started writing. "I'm going to give you something different for the sleep issues, something that won't leave you feeling foggy during the day. And I want you to come back in 3 days so we can check how you're doing." Emma nodded, taking the prescription. "What happens next?" "Next, I make some phone calls, and we start building you a support network that doesn't involve your former company or official military channels. There are people who specialize in helping contractors and veterans who can't access traditional services." As Emma prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah with an expression of cautious gratitude. "Thank you for believing me, for not making me feel crazy, for caring enough to help." After Emma left, Sarah sat in her office for a long time, staring at the phone on her desk. She had some difficult calls to make, reaching out to contact from her military days, calling in favors from colleagues who worked in veteran services, and potentially stepping into territory that could complicate her carefully ordered civilian life. But looking at the empty chair where Emma had been sitting, Sarah knew she didn't have a choice. Some battles followed you home, and sometimes the only way to finally win them was to turn and fight alongside someone else who understood the cost of war. She picked up the phone and started dialing. Dr. Lisa Manning's office in Cedar Bay was nothing like what Emma had expected. Instead of sterile medical furniture and intimidating degrees on the walls, the room felt more like a comfortable living room, with soft lighting, plants, and 2 leather chairs positioned at angles that allowed conversation without forced eye contact. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Emma said, settling into one of the chairs. Sarah had made the appointment the day after Emma's breakdown in the clinic, somehow arranging it for the following week instead of the usual month-long wait. "Dr. Chun speaks very highly of you," Dr. Manning said, her voice warm but professional. She was in her 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes that suggested she'd heard difficult stories before. "She mentioned you're a contractor veteran dealing with some challenging circumstances." Emma nodded, surprised by how much easier it was to acknowledge her status now that she'd finally told someone the truth. "Afghanistan, private military company. IED incident 6 months ago. I work with a lot of contractors," Dr. Manning said. "The unique challenges you face in accessing services, the legal complications with NDAs, the isolation from traditional veteran support networks. It's unfortunately more common than people realize." Relief flooded through Emma. Finally, someone who understood the complexity of her situation without requiring extensive explanation. "Dr. Chun said you might be able to help with the financial aspects as well. There are several grant programs specifically for contractors and veterans who fall through the VA cracks. I help people navigate those applications all the time." Dr. Manning leaned forward slightly. "But before we talk logistics, I'd like to understand what you've been experiencing. Can you tell me about your symptoms?" For the next hour, Emma found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. Dr. Manning asked thoughtful questions that helped her identify patterns she hadn't noticed. How certain sounds triggered panic attacks, how her hypervigilance increased in crowded spaces, how survivor's guilt amplified her other symptoms. "What you're describing is complex PTSD with some specific features related to moral injury," Dr. Manning explained. "The fact that you continued to function under extreme stress, treating wounded colleagues while dealing with your own trauma, created additional psychological complications." "Moral injury?" Emma asked. "It occurs when you're forced to act in ways that conflict with your moral code, or when you witness events that challenge your fundamental beliefs about right and wrong, safety and danger. In your case, Being placed in a position where you had to choose between your own well-being and helping others created a psychological bind that complicated your trauma response. Emma felt something click into place. That's why I couldn't get back on the trucks. It wasn't just fear. It felt like betraying the people who died. Exactly. Your mind was trying to protect you from further trauma, but your moral code was telling you that stepping back was abandonment of duty. That internal conflict is exhausting and can make other symptoms much worse. As the session continued, Dr. Manning outlined a treatment plan that included both individual therapy and EMDR, a movement desensitization and reprocessing specifically designed for trauma recovery. She also mentioned a support group for contractors and veterans that met weekly in a private setting. The group is small, maybe 8 people, and everyone understands the unique challenges of contractor status. No official records, no insurance involvement unless you want it, and everyone signs confidentiality agreements. Dr. Manning handed Emma a card with meeting information. It might help to connect with others who understand what you're going through. Walking out of Dr. Manning's office, Emma felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate hope she'd carried when she first came to Millhaven, but a realistic sense that recovery might actually be possible. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did it go? Coffee later if you want to talk." Emma stared at the message for a moment. 3 weeks ago, she would have politely declined and retreated to her apartment. But something had shifted during her session with Dr. Manning. Maybe it was time to stop isolating herself. "Coffee sounds good," she texted back. "Thank you for setting this up." They met at Millhaven Small Cafe, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation. Sarah was already there when Emma arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and an expression of gentle concern. "You look better," Sarah said as Emma sat down. "More relaxed. Dr. Manning is incredible. I can't believe you got me an appointment so quickly." Emma wrapped her hands around the warm mug, using the heat to ground herself. She explained things in a way that finally made sense. "I've been blaming myself for not being able to just tough it out, but apparently that's part of the problem." Sarah nodded. "One of the hardest things for military people to accept is that mental health injuries are just as real and deserving of treatment as physical ones. We're trained to push through pain, but some types of pain get worse when you try to ignore them." "How did you figure that out?" Emma asked. "In your own recovery, I mean." Sarah was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I almost didn't. I spent the first year after I got out trying to pretend nothing had happened, that I could just slop back into civilian life like the last 4 years hadn't occurred. I was functional during the day, but the nights—" She shook her head. "The nights were terrible. What changed? I had a patient, a little girl who'd been in a car accident. She reminded me of a child I'd treated in Afghanistan, one I wasn't able to save. I had a complete breakdown in the middle of treating her, had to leave the emergency room." Sarah's voice grew quieter. "That's when I realized I couldn't keep pretending I was fine." Emma leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I got help. Real help, like I'm encouraging you to do. It took about a year of therapy before I felt like myself again, and even now I have occasional difficult days. But I learned that having a trauma response doesn't make you weak or broken. It makes you human." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the cafe window as people walked by on Millhaven's quiet main street. Emma found herself noticing details she'd missed before: an elderly man feeding pigeons, a young mother pushing a stroller, teenagers laughing outside the ice cream shop. Simple, peaceful moments that reminded her why she'd chosen this small town for her fresh start. "Sarah," Emma said finally, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever regret your service? Not politically or anything like that, but personally, do you ever wish you'd made different choices?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "That's complicated. I regret some of the things I saw, some of the people I couldn't save. I regret how long it took me to get help afterward. But the service itself? No. I helped people during some of the worst moments of their lives. That has to count for something, even with everything it cost you, especially because of what it cost me." The fact that it was difficult, that it changed me, that's what made it meaningful. Sarah met Emma's eyes across the table. The same way your service was meaningful, even though it brought you here feeling broken and lost. Emma felt tears threatening again, but they were different from the desperate sobs in Sarah's office. These were tears of recognition, of finally understanding that her experience had value even though it had wounded her. I keep thinking about my teammates who didn't make it home, Emma said, wondering if I have the right to struggle when they don't have the chance to struggle. That's survivor's guilt talking, Sarah said gently. And I bet if you could ask them, they'd tell you that they didn't sacrifice their lives so you could spend your suffering. They'd want you to heal, to find happiness, to live fully enough for all of you. The words hit Emma like a physical force, cutting through months of self-doubt and guilt. She'd been so focused on honoring her fallen teammates' memory through suffering that she'd never considered honoring it through healing. Dr. Manning mentioned a support group. Emma said, "Have you ever been to one?" I went to one for about 6 months, early in my recovery. It helped tremendously to talk to people who understood without explanation. Sarah pulled out her phone. "Actually, there's something I want to show you." She scrolled through her contacts and showed Emma a group text thread. "These are some of the people from my old support group. We still check in with each other regularly, share resources, celebrate milestones. Once you have that kind of connection with people who understand, it doesn't just go away." Emma read through a few of the recent messages, someone celebrating a work promotion, another asking for recommendations for a therapist in a new city, a third sharing a photo from a hiking trip. Normal life moments, shared between people who understood each other's journeys. "Would it be weird if I said I'm a little jealous of that?" Emma asked. "Not weird at all. Community is one of the things we miss most when we transition out of service. The military creates instant bonds between people who've been through similar experiences. Civilians can be supportive, but they can't provide that same understanding." As they finished their coffee, Sarah brought up something that had been on her mind since their last appointment. "Emma, I want to ask you about your living situation. Are you happy with your apartment here in Millhaven?" "It's fine," Emma said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Small but adequate. The reason I ask is that I've been thinking about your isolation issue. I have a guest house on my property that I never use. It's fully furnished, has its own entrance, but it's close enough to the main house that you wouldn't be completely alone." Sarah paused. "I know it might sound strange, but I think we could help each other. I still have difficult nights sometimes, and having someone nearby who understands." Emma stared at her. "You do that? Let a virtual stranger live on your property. You're not a stranger. You're a fellow veteran who needs support, and I'm someone who understands that journey. Besides," Sarah smiled, "my neighbors think I'm too isolated anyway. Having a tenant might make them worry about me less." The offer was tempting, more tempting than Emma wanted to admit. Her current apartment felt like a hiding place, somewhere to retreat from the world rather than engage with it. But the idea of living near someone who understood her experience, who wouldn't judge her for having bad nights or needing space. "Can I think about it?" Emma asked. "Of course. Take your time. The offer isn't going anywhere." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Emma felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since the IED incident, she could envision a future that included healing, connection, and maybe even happiness. Walking back to her apartment, she passed the community center where Dr. Manning's support group met. On impulse, she stopped and looked through the window at the meeting room. Next week, she would walk through those doors and take another step toward reclaiming her life. Her phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. "Forgot to mention, there's a farmer's market this Saturday morning. Might be a good low-key way to practice being around people again if you're interested." Emma typed back quickly, "I'll be there." That night, as she lay in bed waiting for sleep that might or might not come, Emma thought about the conversation with Dr. Manning, the coffee with Sarah, and the possibility of a future that included community and healing. The nightmares might still come. The hypervigilance might still spike at unexpected sounds, but for the first time in months, she had reason to believe that these symptoms would eventually fade. More importantly, She had reason to believe that she wouldn't have to face them alone. Outside her window, the ocean waves continued their eternal rhythm, and Emma found herself matching her breathing to their steady pulse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it would also bring new opportunities for connection and healing. For tonight, that was enough. 6 months later, Emma stood in the kitchen of the guest house, making coffee while watching Sarah tend to her garden through the window. The morning routine had become as natural as breathing. Sarah would wave from among her tomato plants, Emma would wave back, and they'd meet on the back deck in 20 minutes to share coffee and plan their day. The guest house had been a revelation. Small, but comfortable, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light, and a sense of privacy that allowed Emma to heal at her own pace. More importantly, it provided the security of knowing help was nearby without the pressure of constant interaction. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Manning. "Looking forward to our session today. Great work on your homework assignment." The homework had been challenging, writing a letter to herself from the perspective of one of her fallen teammates. Dr. Manning had suggested it as a way to combat survivor's guilt, and while the exercise had been emotionally difficult, the results had been transformative. Instead of carrying her teammates' deaths as a burden of shame, Emma was learning to carry their memory as a source of strength. "Morning," Sarah called as she climbed the deck stairs, her hands dirty from garden work. "How'd you sleep?" "Better. Only woke up twice, and I was able to get back to sleep both times." Emma handed her a mug of coffee. "Dr. Manning says that's significant progress." "It is. 6 months ago, you were barely sleeping at all." Sarah settled into her usual chair. "Speaking of progress, have you given any more thought to Mike's job offer?" Mike Henderson was a local contractor who'd been looking for someone to help with project management. Sarah had mentioned Emma's background in logistics and security planning, and Mike had been impressed enough to offer her part-time work that could potentially grow into something more substantial. "I want to take it," Emma said. "It would be good to have purpose again, contribute to something constructive. But I'm nervous about working with people who don't know about my background." "You don't have to tell them everything. Your skills are valuable regardless of where you acquire them." Sarah sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Besides, Mike's a veteran himself. Army engineer, 2 tours in Iraq. He understands the value of military experience." This was part of what Emma had learned to love about Millhaven, the way people's histories were accepted without judgment. Mike knew she was a veteran without knowing the specifics of her service or her struggles. Dr. Manning's support group had taught her that she could choose how much of her story to share and with whom. The support group had been another turning point. 8 people, all veterans or contractors, all dealing with various aspects of trauma recovery. The first meeting had been terrifying, but by the 3rd session, Emma had found herself looking forward to the weekly gatherings. There was something profoundly healing about sitting in a circle with people who understood things she couldn't explain to anyone else. "I've been thinking about something," Emma said, watching a pelican dive for fish in the distance. "Remember when you asked if I regretted my service?" Sarah nodded. "I think I gave you the wrong answer. I said I wasn't sure, that I was still figuring it out. But I know now I don't regret it. Not the service itself, not the people I helped, not even the trauma if it led me here." "What changed your mind?" Emma was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "Last week in group, there was a new guy, Navy corpsman, struggling with some of the same issues I had. Watching him tell his story, seeing how lost and isolated he felt, I realized something. I was sitting there as living proof that recovery is possible, that you can come through trauma and build something meaningful on the other side. That's a powerful realization. It made me understand that my experience, all of it, including the hard parts, has value. Not just for me, but for other people who are going through similar struggles." Emma turned to look at Sarah. "Is that why you decided to help me? Because you saw something of your own journey in my situation?" Sarah smiled. "Partly yes, but mostly because I recognize someone worth helping, someone with the strength to heal if given the right support. I want to do that for other people. I don't know how yet, but I want to find ways to help veterans and contractors who fall through the cracks like I did." "Actually," Sarah said, I've been thinking about that too. Dr. Manning mentioned she's been getting more referrals than she can handle, especially contractors who need someone who understands their unique situation. What are you suggesting? What if we started something here in Millhaven? Not therapy, you need additional training for that, but peer support. A way for veterans and contractors to connect with each other and access resources. The idea sparked something in Emma's chest, excitement she hadn't felt since before the IED incident. Like a resource center? Or a nonprofit organization? Something that could provide the kind of informal support network that helped both of us heal. Sarah pulled out her phone. I've actually been doing some research. There are grand opportunities for veteran-focused community organizations, especially in underserved areas like this. Emma felt a familiar flutter of anxiety at the thought of starting something new, but underneath, it was a stronger current of purpose. Would you want to do this together? I was hoping you'd ask. Between your operational experience and my medical background, we could create something really valuable. They spent the next hour brainstorming possibilities, drop-in hours for informal conversation, referral services for specialized care, advocacy for contractors navigating benefits issues, maybe even temporary housing for veterans in crisis. The more they talked, the more feasible it seemed. There's something else I want to tell you, Emma said as their planning session wound down. I've been thinking about writing about my experience. Not for publication necessarily, but as a way to process everything that's happened. That sounds like excellent therapy work. Dr. Manning suggested it, but I think it could be more than that. If I ever decide to share my story publicly, it might help other contractors realize they're not alone. Sarah's expression grew serious. Have you thought about the legal implications? Your NDAs. I've been researching that. There are organizations that help whistleblowers and people facing legal retaliation for speaking out about contractor issues. It turns out I'm not the only one who's been silenced by corporate legal agreements. Emma's voice grew stronger. I'm not ready to take that step yet, but knowing it's possible, it feels like getting some of my power back. As they prepared to go to their respective daily activities, Sarah to the clinic, Emma to her therapy appointment. Emma reflected on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman hiding from her past, struggling alone with trauma she couldn't name or understand. Now she was someone with a support network, a sense of purpose, and a vision for the future. Her phone rang as she was getting ready to leave for town. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the area code seemed familiar. Hello, Emma Rodriguez? This is Captain Jennifer Walsh with the Army Reserve. I got your contact information from someone at the VA who said you might be interested in some volunteer opportunities. Emma's heart rate spiked automatically at the mention of military authority, but she forced herself to listen. We're looking for people with security and logistics experience to help train reserve units in civilian contractor integration. It's voluntary, unpaid, but it would allow you to contribute your expertise to current service members. The irony wasn't lost on Emma. The same skills that had led to her trauma were now being sought out as valuable contributions. But instead of feeling triggered, she found herself intrigued. Can you tell me more about what that would involve? As Captain Walsh explained the program, Emma realized this could be another piece of her healing journey. Using her experience to help active service members avoid some of the pitfalls she'd encountered, contributing to better contractor-military relations, maybe even helping prevent future incidents like the one that had changed her life. I'm interested, she said. Can I have some time to think about it and discuss it with my support team? After ending the call, Emma sat in her car outside Dr. Manning's office, processing this unexpected opportunity. A year ago, the thought of returning to any military environment would have sent her into a panic attack. Now, while still nervous, she could envision herself in that role, not as a victim returning to the scene of her trauma, but as a survivor with valuable knowledge to share. Her therapy session that day focused on this new opportunity and what it represented in terms of her recovery. Dr. Manning helped her explore the difference between returning to military environments from a place of fear versus returning from a place of strength and purpose. The fact that you're even considering this suggests significant healing, Dr. Manning said. But it's important to be honest about your motivations. Are you interested in this opportunity because it feels like meaningful work, or because you feel obligated to say yes? Emma thought carefully before answering. Both, maybe, but mostly because I think I have something valuable to offer, and because it feels like a way to honor my teammates' sacrifice, using what we learned together to help other people. That sounds like healthy motivation to me. That evening, Emma found Sarah reading on the deck, enjoying the last light of sunset. They'd fallen into the habit of these quiet evening conversations, processing their days and planning for tomorrow. "How was your therapy session?" Sarah asked. Emma told her about the Army Reserve opportunity, watching Sarah's expression shift from concern to thoughtful consideration. "What's your gut feeling about it?" Sarah asked. "I want to do it, but I'm scared it might be too much too soon." Emma settled into her usual chair. "But Dr. Manning pointed out something interesting. The fear I'm feeling now is different from the panic I used to experience. It's anticipatory anxiety about a new challenge, not trauma response to a perceived threat. That's a significant distinction. I think I want to try it. Start small, maybe observe some training sessions before committing to anything larger." Emma looked out at the darkening ocean. "If it goes well, it could be another way to help people. If it doesn't, at least I'll know I tried." "I think it sounds like an excellent next step. And you have support here if you need to process anything difficult that comes up." As night fell over Millhaven, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman running from her past, hiding from the world, convinced that her service had ruined her for normal life. Now, she was someone building a future that incorporated her military experience as a source of strength rather than shame. The nightmares still came occasionally. The hypervigilance still spiked in crowded places, but these symptoms no longer defined her existence. They were manageable inconveniences rather than insurmountable obstacles, reminders of what she'd survived rather than evidence of what she'd lost. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of her support group members. "Rough night. Can we talk tomorrow?" Emma typed back quickly. "Of course. Coffee at 10. The exchange reminded her of Sarah's old support group network, the way healing people supported others still struggling. Emma was becoming part of that continuum, no longer just receiving help, but able to offer it as well. As she prepared for bed, Emma thought about the letter she'd written to herself from her fallen teammate's perspective. The words had been difficult to write, but liberating to read. "Your job isn't to carry our deaths as punishment for surviving. Your job is to live fully enough to honor what we gave up." Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the job interview with Mike, another therapy session, her first observation visit with the Army Reserve Unit. But tonight, Emma fell asleep to the sound of ocean waves, surrounded by the security of community and the possibility of purpose. In the main house, Sarah also prepared for sleep, grateful for the quiet sounds of life from the guest house. Evidence that sometimes helping someone else heal was the final step in healing yourself. The girl who had once hidden from her military past was now someone who could use that experience to build bridges between worlds, helping others find their way home from war. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, washing the shores of Millhaven clean with each tide, just as time and community and purpose slowly washed away the worst of their wounds, leaving strength where there had once been only pain.